Hello and welcome to the podcast. Every week we will tackle different subjects and have a conversation regarding the topic. Please listen closely as we facilitate a conversation, as we will be using slang and new words that will be displayed on the screen like so. Without further ado, let's begin our podcast. Today's topic is food delivery services. So, why do people use food delivery services in general?
Well, I feel as though the reason why they use them is because they're super convenient and it's just very easy for people, especially because nowadays everyone's working so much, and you would think that with working from home people would have more time to cook, but I really don't think that's happened.
I kind of wondered that. So what has changed? Because, clearly a lot of people did cook more in the past now. Or not now, but rather in the past. They cooked more, but now there doesn't seem to be any time to do so. Why do you think that's the case?
I think work from home has been really challenging for people because it's really hard for people to clock out of work when they're still at home, right? So they're doing everything at home. They never really get to leave. There's no 9 to 5. You're working. For a lot of people, working in the same room as where they work. So I feel like that probably, explains the uptick in food delivery service use.
Okay, that's I think that's a very good point there. Now, in terms of that idea with remote work, that is something that is very common today, and I feel like, do you think in a way, kind of talking a little off topic here, but do you think in a way that like different companies can exploit that the fact that because you're working from home, they know that you could just order takeout, and that therefore they'll give you more work?
I think so. I think that bosses nowadays expect you to be more available at all hours. That's why I've heard stuff about people not being able to take breaks or take lunches, or because there's no proper clock in, clock out time. So
that's a good point. So then in that case, I think one thing we could kind of talk about too in terms of food delivery is also, we're kind of talking about the work aspect, but let's actually, I guess, go into the more fun aspect, right? So what would you say are some benefits in which would be great to use these food delivery services versus going out into the streets to finding these places by yourself?
Well, I think it could be like an after-work treat, People are overworked and they're really tired, so I think it's like a fun little treat to order some new, nice restaurant that you might not want to go to, for example. So that could be fun. That could be a fun aspect.
Okay, that's a good point, but one thing that I'm kind of thinking about as well is what you just said, right? Earlier, you were saying how for a lot of these people, there's no time because they just work remotely, right? But, for instance, how would it make sense for them to spend time almost like scrolling through different restaurants, similar to that of Instagram, I would even say? How would you say they're different or the same, I suppose?
I think they are the same. I think it's like a way of, people, like I said, are overworked, and it becomes another source of fun. Like, we're glued to our phones even more than before. So I think this is another aspect of that.
Oh, that's a very interesting thing that you just said, that we're glued to it. The way I kind of think about it is, like, for instance, right, before you would kind of go out, the whole point of going to a restaurant, right, was for fun, was for all this, but do you think there's any fun in food delivery, or do you think that's kind of cutting out another piece of, like, fun in our life?
Yeah, I think it's something else that maybe the elite can do. I mean, if you think about it, maybe more working class people might struggle to order out or order take-in as often, right? That's one thing. Another thing, too, is I feel that with more and more cities opting in for vaccine mandates and mask mandates just to go to restaurants, using food delivery apps makes it so that you can bypass that and you are able to access those restaurants without having to show proof of vaccination.
Okay, that's a very good point. The only thing I kind of look at, too, though, is what is the fun in that, though? Like, yes, it makes sense that you can bypass all this using food delivery services, but where's the fun in that, right? Because the way I like to think of it is, growing up, I would go, I would go with my family to like a restaurant to celebrate any kind of an occasion, whether it's a birthday or a celebration. But now we're supposed to just be okay with food delivery. There's something almost like dystopian about that.
Possibly. I think maybe in general, I think overall the idea is that the lines are blurred. There's not enough time in the day to do everything, to eat, to order food, to work, to relax. And so that's why everything's blending into one. While you're on a meeting with your boss, you can go ahead and order food delivery for yourself, So everything's kind of blurring and there's a lack of boundaries.
That's a very good point. A lack of boundaries. Another thing that I kind of also want to talk about too is I kind of noticed that there is a demographic of people that do order more than others. So, for instance, I kind of see it more with millennials and like Gen Zers. They're more likely to order rather than their counterpart, which is they're more likely to kind of order things like the more old-fashioned way. What I mean is either they call the restaurant for delivery, but even that's not so common anymore, or they'll kind of go to like the website. Like if that restaurant has a specific website, they'll just go and order it directly from them, which is like it's not as classic, but it still holds that same value, right? Instead of using these like services like Uber or Grab, for instance.
So you mean like that the older counterparts are the ones that are more okay with using the vendor directly instead of Uber or using these services, these third-party services.
Right. And that I think right there, what you just said, I think is a good thing to kind of talk about. So with the idea of like third-party users, right, or like how you put it, third parties, basically. Why do you think most people are more likely to, instead of supporting the vendor directly, why use these services instead?
I think it's because it's more convenient. I think that a lot of times, I think, it's something that you also said. It's fun to browse and see what's out there. I think there's something exciting about seeing, what else is here? What else is here? And I think, like, even though McDonald's has their own app, why would you look there instead of just looking at Uber, where you could find a bunch of different places instead of...
That's a very good point. I mean, why would I even search through McDonald's?
Right, why would you? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the same simple, sandwiches, chicken nuggets, which honestly don't even taste that good compared to what you can find on Uber Eats.
You get a lot more exotic options, I think.
That's a very good point. So then in that case, do you think it helps businesses to have this kind of like an overexposure, I suppose?
It definitely does. I mean, that's why so many of them pay, right? They pay to get promoted on these apps. That's a service they pay for. And their counterparts, their peers who are not doing this, they suffer because people are less interested. People can't find them.
Okay, that's a good point. So what you just said, right, with people like they can't find them. My question kind of is too, like, for instance, even before COVID, right? Why do you think most people, even like with the age of technology, it's just a lot easier to find them via like these applications rather than going into the city, right, and walking through the streets and finding these little places? Why order it?
What do you think?
I think in a way it's kind of like what you mentioned earlier, because I feel like this is something that I kind of get a lot too, where there's kind of like an imbalance, I would say. For example, some people would say that, it's because there's no time, like you, which makes sense. But other people would actually say that it's because of laziness. And we're not saying that as like a negative thing, but rather we're stating it as a fact. That we're saying that because you have convenience literally at the palm of your hands, you can just, you can order anything at any point, whether it's food or packages or whatnot, that it disincentivizes people to kind of go and, find things for themselves.
Right. No, that's definitely true. I think we're lazier now than ever. I think we're more and more reliant and dependent on convenience than ever before, and businesses know this. That's why businesses exploit our need for convenience, Right.
No, I think that's a very, very good point. And I feel like, in a way, kind of talking about all this, right, clearly I feel like that's where you have companies like Uber Eats kind of taking advantage of that, because with the pandemic, right, there's like clearly we see that there is a curtail of like, people going out and like even if it's just for a simple walk, right, like that has curtailed significantly in the sense that now people, they're so afraid of going outside, it's just easier and safer to order in. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that safety is being used as a crutch in a way. It's like this idea that I think what I was trying to say is that I think businesses are now selling the idea of safety to boost sales, to boost their own business.
That's almost ironic, right? Because they're selling safety, but then how safe is the food they eat? Like, what I mean is, it's not like there's anything dangerous about it, but is it healthy, though? Like, is it possible, for example, right? Okay, you're working from home, you have kids, maybe you don't have time to do any of these things. But what do you think about the idea that, okay, so you try to, you want to get something healthy, but then you order salad, let's say for McDonald's, just just as a general reference.
Right.
You order their Caesar salad, for instance, but it's covered in that Caesar salad sauce. Now, how healthy is the food that we order from Uber Eats or any of these other applications like Grab?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is very healthy, but I think that the businesses aren't bothered about that. I think that's the choices of the consumer makes about what's fair for him, what's worth it to the consumer. And I feel like maybe health isn't more and more. I feel like you would think that while yes, there are a lot of benefits to working from home and a lot of reasons why people are less stressed out than, dealing with a long commute, for instance, or having to deal with coworkers face to face. But at the same time, the lack of boundaries, the dissolving of boundaries has kind of resulted in, a place where there is no separate space for yourself, for your health, for putting yourself as a separate thing to take care of,
So in that case, do you think, in a way, we're too busy to even look out for ourselves?
Yeah.
Like, we're just supposed to kind of... Like, maybe that's the whole point, right? Like, you have doctors to kind of, like, tell you, hey, okay, you're not doing so well because we are not in a good, like, I guess, not good state, but rather in a busy state to kind of look out for these things and, watch out for them.
Right.
So now this kind of goes on to another thing, too, right? Because... do you think that Uber Eats can be very taxing on like anyone's money, for instance? Is it taxing on them?
Taxing in the sense of what, making consumers spend their money, or
not just spend money, but especially a lot of their money, because it's not like this thing is cheap, right? Mm-hmm. So even though it's so I'm not going to say it's so expensive, like it can be, of course, right? Especially because some places they say that you do need to have like some kind of minimum delivery before you can even order it. So what do you think about that? So do you think it really is like affecting people a lot, like in terms of like price point?
I think so. I think that more than ever people are buying things they can't afford with money they don't have, opening more and more credit cards. So I feel like, yes, people are struggling, but at the same time, I mean, they're providing what some would argue a crucial service, right? Because if they're not able to cook for themselves, or they look at this as a fun little activity to do, then Uber Eats could argue that is a worthwhile service.
That's a good point. And earlier you kind of mentioned this too, where you were saying about how like it's really up to the consumer, but my question is, can the consumer, like, I guess when I say this, I mean like, can the consumer be trusted to make the right decisions for themselves?
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I feel like it's really a slippery slope, definitely a slippery slope, because it's like on one hand, right, you do what is necessary, right? If you need to order in because, okay, maybe you're working on like a difficult project, right? Maybe you have to stay in. But on the other hand, I feel as though should there be perhaps healthier options? Because think about a lot of the restaurants, right? It's not like, especially in the world today where we're so knowledgeable in terms of, how many calories we're consuming or carbohydrates, how do we know that the restaurant is actually using like, a set amount of oil or a set amount of...
Okay, see, I disagree with you. I think that now more than ever, especially near big metropolitan areas, you have access to organic restaurants, organic food, quality ingredients. You have access to that in ways that you didn't before. It's easier now to, observe various diets like, veganism or keto diet or whatever. It's easier to do that now than ever before, I feel. And I think beyond that, when you're like, how can you trust if, the calories that a restaurant puts out are actually accurate?
Right.
Well, I mean, then that's a you problem. If you're that obsessed, if it's something that's that important to you, then you should do the weighing and counting yourself at home. But if you can't do that, then you're getting a great service at a cost.
Right, of course, like for sure at a cost. So then, in that case, another thing that we can also kind of talk about too is one thing that I feel like is really bad in terms of all this is, especially when you're using Uber Eats, I feel like this puts a lot more pressure on the business, especially because think about the fact that now it's not like they're relying on like, customers coming in, but rather not only do they have to maintain, like an off-premises traffic going, but rather they also have to make sure that their reviews are up to, like up to standard. So what do you think about the idea of reviews?
I think it's very toxic, honestly, the whole idea of reviews, because people exploit that. Customers exploit that. They try to... there's many occasions where there's accounts of customers harassing and bullying businesses into giving them a free item or giving them a free service in exchange for a good review. And that's and a lot of times what happens is that if customers are leaving unfair reviews, let's say Google reviews or Yelp reviews will refuse to take that review down, even if it's an unfair review.
And I feel like it's kind of scary when you like, especially like, for instance, I myself I like to use reviews just as like a reference point, but I feel like even though I use it only as like a reference point, that alone can make it seem like, oh, I'm sure that I can find very biased information, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of like scary because, for example, if someone already has a bad day and they come into the restaurant, I feel like it's kind of game over for you in that sense.
I agree. It is game over. And I feel like a lot of times, it's very easy also to just pay someone to write a good review or pay someone to write a bad review of your competitor. So these type of things do happen, and it's very unfortunate for the businesses because they suffer.
Right. I feel like that's the thing, right? Is that reviews are meant to help, but I feel like they do more damage than good. Just because I can't say outside of America, but I know at least in America, it's all too common that people leave bad reviews only because either they had a bad day or maybe their idea of customer service was not up to par. So I do notice that especially. And I think that is all the time we have. So thank you for tuning into the podcast. Please watch the follow-up video to this podcast to see an in-depth analysis of the vocabulary words that were used and displayed. Thank you, and we will see you next time.